Hi everyone, welcome again to another episode of Experts Live India podcast. I'm Sameer, and today I'm joined by my colleague Jayanth. Hi Jayanth,
Hi,
how are you doing?
doing great, Samir. Thank you.
Are you enjoying your weekend so far? So I know today is Saturday, and you've agreed very kindly to join me today. Hope I'm
No,
not
yeah,
eating.
absolutely. There's nothing much to do because it's raining quite heavily in Bangalore. So
How is it?
obviously, I can't think of stepping out. I
Uh,
would rather spend probably talking to you on a podcast on a weekend. I would say a wet weekend.
yeah, weekend well spent. Um, Right. So this is actually, in a way, a continuation of another episode that I've already done with Preeti. In that one, we talked about hybrid clouds in general. So we talked about what the concept of hybrid cloud. We talked about why people are moving to public cloud, why are they staying on private clouds, and also in the transition, why are they also thinking of adopting more hybrid cloud approaches, right? Because as you know, not everything can be lifted and shifted to cloud. There have to be some workloads running on premise for whatever reasons, could be data sovereignty, for privacy policies, compliance, whatever, or it's simply they may not be just good enough or fit the right, they may not be the right candidates to move to cloud, right? So there could be various reasons, are all subjective according to their each needs and organizations. But in that episode we also briefly mentioned about the Microsoft hybrid cloud. um, so today we are going to dive a little more deeper into particularly the hybrid cloud, what Microsoft offers. So under that portfolio, we have three products today, right? So um, even before I name that, actually, let me just go ahead and establish Microsoft's position in the hybrid cloud, right? Because you and I, we work in this space, Jayan, so I don't need to tell you that Microsoft is actually probably the most prominent player in the hybrid cloud market today, right? So I very recently read a news article that Azure is actually has overtaken AWS in terms of overall cloud market. Have you read that news?
Yeah, I have. In fact, the growth of Azure has been pretty significant
Yeah.
compared to AWS, and which was always the case before as well. Yeah, Azure is a pretty dominant hyperscaler out there today, no
Yeah,
doubt.
absolutely. And whenever I think of hybrid cloud or whenever I hear of hybrid cloud, um, I hear of Microsoft the most. Now, that might be a bit biased opinion because, admittedly, most of my connections socially are Microsoft oriented. But then again, I've only heard of AWS, let's say Outpost, but I haven't heard of AWS, winning any significant deals.
I, to be very honest, I haven't seen an outpost or heard of an outpost installation, at least in Asia Pacific, which both of us operate out of. But I'm not too sure about other regions. I'm sure there should be few in the US region. But at least from my personal experience for the last 3.5 years, which I've been deeply involved in the hybrid portfolio, but at least I haven't heard the outpost in APJ.
Yeah, same. I think the market today is dominated by VxRail, VMware, but then the next is Microsoft Azure Hybrid Cloud.
Right.
AWS, unfortunately, or GCP is not in not in the game. Unfortunately, they are too far behind. Anyways, so in the portfolio, they offer you three products. It is Microsoft Azure Stack HCI, then there's Azure Stack Hub, and then there's Azure Stack Edge. Admittedly, it looks like HCI is Microsoft's favorite child out of the three because Microsoft has been favoring HCI a lot nowadays, right? So because in every conference, in every major events that Microsoft hosts, Azure Stack HCI is almost always there, right? It not only from the administrative, not only from the program managers, but it also comes down from the top management, from Satya himself, right? So even he is heavily talking about Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah, one is so probably one of the reasons is it does, pretty well in terms of mass market appeal. Because think about customers today, right? See, there are two folds to it. One, the solution capabilities itself, because you can start from as minimal as just a single node, and you can grow up to 16 nodes in a cluster. And it pretty much kind of serves into a wide breadth of use cases that you can
Use
imagine.
cases, yeah.
Unlike probably like Hub, which is specifically designed for a particular use case. And third point is what I think is most relevant currently is a lot of the on-premises infrastructure today is still 70 to 80% is still
It's
running
aging.
on a virtualized platform, right?
Yeah.
Virtualized applications. So customers today, as much as we talk about digital transformation and stuff like that, it's kind of more synonymous with the public cloud than actually on-premises. So this is where the Azure Stack HCI is really icing on the cake. It kind of bridges that gap between on-premises, lift and shift their legacy applications, and also think about modernization at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, so you put it perfectly. I just like HCI is the favorite child because it has the most use cases. It is relevant to, I would go ahead as far as to say it is relevant to all the organizations, not only most, because every business is an IT business today. Could be the core business of the company, could be anything, could be logistics, could be medical, could be oil and gas, could be banking, could be anything, right? But all of that is at the end of the day, the back of the in the back of the business, IT is powering everything. So it's crucial that you keep your IT up to date and running. Anyways, cool. So Jayanth, let's play the intro clip real quick, and we can get started talking more about Adistech HCI in particular today.
Sure.
Nice. So Azure Stack HCI. So there are two parts to it: Azure Stack and HCI. We have in the previous episode with Preeti, in the hybrid cloud episode, we have talked about what HCI is. To very quickly recap, it is basically the consolidation of your hardware into a single device. So you no longer have a compute tier, a networking tier, and a storage tier. So it is all combined into one, and then it is kind of abstracted as a software defined data center layer, right? So you no longer interact with the hardware itself, you manage everything using a software. So let's start, Jay, and let's start with what does an Azure Stack HCI solution look like? Because you and I, we have both been heavily involved into spreading the word about HCI. We have been evangelizing HCI. We have been talking to the customers. We have been trying to lay out all the foundations and use cases of HCI for the customers. So let's start with, in your opinion, because you have been involved in a lot more deals than me. Let's hear your opinion as to what does a typical Azure Stack HCI solution looks like.
Okay, so so lot of people think, especially when I talk to different customers, they think Azure Stack HCI is a total new phenomenon out there, or it's a totally new product. And the apprehensions many customers have today are, hey, you're trying to sell me a solution which is fairly new in the market, which is not seasoned enough, right? To be honest, that's not the truth. Azure Stack HCI has been rebranded version of the Windows storage spaces today, just called it WSSD, right? So WSSD existed way back in 2016. So if you look at if you hear customers talking about I have my own apprehensions about embracing Azure Stack HCI. I think this is where we really need to bring those the historical overview of what Azure Stack HCI was and the legacy behind it. Right, it's got really a rich legacy of Windows Storage Spaces Direct, and especially companies like Dell or any other OEM, for instance, have been delivering solutions into the market which were running WSSD 2016. So it's definitely not new. It is out there, just a rebranded version of WSSD. But yes, there's been a lot of innovations that Microsoft has done, especially considering the fact that yesterday Microsoft hold their head high because they probably are one of the most predominant players in the hybrid space. Is because of one of the reasons why Microsoft is able to do that is they were born in the enterprise, unlike probably other hyperscalers, right?
Yeah.
They were born in the enterprise. They understood what the customers on-premises infrastructure looks like. They probably understand way better than anyone else, right? And cloud Azure was an afterthought. So that gives them, and in addition to that, I think probably Microsoft has probably the richest, partner ecosystem out there. Okay?
Absolutely.
That,
Yeah.
that really helps Microsoft drive these conversations with customers. Remember, most customers that I talk to, they're comfortable having a conversation with their respective partners rather than probably having with any of the bigger companies like Microsoft or AWS or GCP. So this is where Microsoft really enjoys that cushion, where they have this very tight partnership with most of the predominant partners out there, and partners in turn have fantastic relationship with their end customers.
Yeah, absolutely. That is perfect, right? Because you said, like you said, Microsoft has probably one of the ecosystem. Microsoft ecosystem is very interconnected and it is huge, right? Because Microsoft products are used in, well, as much as I've come across it, most organizations are either VMware or Microsoft when it comes to data center, modernization things. But Microsoft has been in the game since a long time, like you rightly pointed out, and they understand what the customers want, they understand what the problems are, and they know how to address them.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. So you said that you can start with a one node cluster, can go up to 16 node cluster. So let's quickly address what that is. Let's address what a cluster is, because in Azure Stack HCI is, so when you order, let's say Azure Stack HCI, you get the hardware. So it is Azure Stack HCI, understandably or admittedly, is only an operating system that runs on top of your on-prem infrastructure, which is purpose built for hybrid cloud and all that stuff. So we'll talk about that later. But at the core of it, it is just an operating system. But when you order Azure Stack HCI, you get it along with the hardware, right? So you just don't get the software. It's not like you go to Microsoft Marketplace and download Azure Stack HCI on a computer and just run it. So it comes with its own integrated, validated HCI, like I said, HCI software defined hardware. So there's, I've been reading, so in the catalog, if you go into Azure Stack HCI catalog on the Microsoft website, so there is a mention, there are a bunch of filters on the left, right? So there's one of the filters there is, do you want a validated system or do you want an integrated system? So, to someone who's not familiar with this term, so what does an integrated system mean, or what does a validated? What's the difference? What would
Okay.
you recommend?
Yeah. So if you look at integrated system approach is nothing new, right? It's been there for a long, long time. Sorry, validated system approach is nothing new. It's been there for a long, long time. In fact, right? Think about it, right? Any new operating system that's out there, generally, for bare metals, like, just a bare metal chassis, that needs to be validated against that particular operating system. And that holds true even for Azure Stack HCI, right? So they have this mainstream of servers, which a lot of the OEMs sell today. They are also validated along with the other operating systems like Red Hat Linux. So, just like any other certification approach out there. So, what most of the hardware OEMs do is, along with the certifying other operating systems, they also certify Azure Stack HCI. Okay, but So that's the validated system approach. In case of, I'll tell you one of the goodness of validated system approach is that it's so much easier for me to roll out the newer versions of the hardware. As and when, let's say, for example, Intel releases the new chipset, right? I can just put that chipset, validate it with whatever the latest version of Azure Stack HCI is available in the market, and just ship it out. So if you look at the from an OEM standpoint, it gives them very little, investment in terms of you're releasing the newer certified hardware, which is certified on Azure Stack HCI. So there is a shorter timelines per se, right? But if you think about integrated, it's kind of little complicated. It's not that simple. So integrated means you're going to sell this as a complete solution, right? Not just as a certified hardware. Okay. When I say, what do you mean by selling this as a complete solution? So it's something like, you're productizing the entire solution, which works on Azure Stack HCI. For instance, right, if you look at companies like Dell, so they have this integrated system approach where these systems are predominantly certified only to work on Azure Stack HCI, right? These systems, for example, AX nodes that you see on the hardware catalog in Microsoft side. So these AX nodes are specifically purpose-built hardware that runs on Azure Stack HCI. Okay, not that other OEMs also, a lot of the other OEMs are also doing, for example. So it's that. But one of the advantages of going with the systems, integrated system approach, from a customer perspective, they don't really have to worry about the end-to-end functionality or even a future growth, for instance, right?
Right.
So one of the apprehensions many customers have today is, hey, you know what? I don't want to get into the business of IT, right? I want to really focus on my business goals today. Now, if you go with certified, as a validated node approach, what happens many a times is that you ship the hardware and certified on a particular operating system version only. Okay. Now tomorrow, Microsoft will release a newer version of the operating system. Now nobody would have validated that part, or Microsoft keeps releasing, monthly updates, quarterly cumulative updates, and so on. Nobody validates that. Not just that. Like, I haven't even spoken about the firmware and the driver versions which these OEMs release, right? Every quarter, every OEM generally keeps releasing the newer patches of the hardware updates, like firmware and the BIOS and so on. Who's going to validate all of this? So, from a customer standpoint, they are really wholly solely responsible for validating all of this, right? You never know where it breaks,
Absolutely.
right? Now, all of that, those pain points from our customer angle has been offloaded to OEMs in an integrated system approach. Okay, so you are going to treat this as a complete solution, which means right from the process of sizing, ordering, to maintenance, to support, Dell kind of covers it complete end to end, or any integrated system, approach. Any vendors who are actually adopting the integrated system approach is obligated to cover the end to end scenario for customers. If you look at the Microsoft documentation, actually says Azure Stack HCI is best hosted on an
On
integrated
an
system,
integrated system. Yeah.
right? So if you look at it, so there are a lot of advantages for a customer because they don't have to worry about checking or validating or spend innumerable amount of time to see whether this system works on a particular version of the operating system or not, right? Because that's all been offloaded to either Microsoft or the OEM partner.
Yeah. So in the sense that validated systems are less work for the vendor, but more for customers. Um,
Absolutely.
but of course, that also means on the flip side, it also means that it is cheaper. Granted that integrated systems can feel a little more expensive, especially in comparison with the validated nodes. But if you compare it in a long run, in terms of future growth, like you said, or the man hours involved, or the time that you spend, or the efforts, or the human resources that you allocate to just keep the cluster running. I think in a longer term, that kind of amortizes, that kind of
Absolutely.
distributes the cost across.
It will neutralize that initial investment from a customer standpoint, where they would have invested probably a little more, like you said, on an integrated system, kind of neutralizes over a period of time. And over a longer period of time, they actually start really reaping the
Saving money.
benefits and the value of their investment which they did. In fact, I have personally spoken to many customers who've come back and said, you know what, I'm done with validated systems, right? I want an integrated system because I don't have to really worry about the nitty gritties of how it works, the validation that my team has to do. There's so much of man hours that is saved from a customer standpoint, right? But on the flip side, like I said, cost is one. The other thing is, frequent releases of the newer versions of the hardware or the software, right? It becomes a little challenging. For example, Microsoft keeps releasing newer versions of the update, but then remember, it needs to go through rigorous engineering hours of validation in terms of integrated system before it is shipped out to customer and say, hey, you can take it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is not only in terms of validation, though, right? So integrated systems are much more than that. So it is actually also a joint engineering approach, right?
Yep.
So, like we said, that AX nodes are specifically designed to run on Azure Stack HCI operating system. So as it goes, so there are also some other really cool features like lifecycle management,
Yep.
update, cluster updates, cluster one click, cluster creation, cluster prerequisites, and all that, right? So it's not just about validation. It's not just about, okay, this set of hardware works in a system. That is more of a validated approach, actually. Dell, as part of, not only Dell, again, I keep saying Dell because we work for Dell, but for any other OEM that does integrated system, they also add on their own services to it, right? So they also add on, let's say in Dell's case, we add on Pro Deploy, Pro Support. So what basically that is assistance to deploy your cluster end to end. Right? So
Yeah.
you literally don't have to do anything there.
Yeah, and not just that, right? So, for instance, think about from a support standpoint, right? Now, if a customer encounters a problem, either with hardware or with software, or they don't know where the issue is, right? It could be underlying issue with the hardware or underlying issue with the software, right? So with the integrated system approach, they have a single ticketing system, right? Which means an OEM partner delivering integrated system and Microsoft can mutually exchange these tickets internally and work together to solve a problem, right? So customers don't have to make two separate calls to one to the OEM hardware vendor and one to Microsoft, right? It's completely just one single ticketing. Makes the overall support experience so much
Much
seamless.
better. Yeah.
Now, if you think at the other perspective, right? It's from a support, even from a from a support standpoint. Um, so a validated system, generally, what they say is, hey, you know what? If you have problems with the operating system, you need to contact Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
So they don't support really the customer at the cluster level, even irrespective of whether the customer buys the operating system from the respective OEM partner or not, right? So they don't really care about that. So they just say, hey, you know what? If you have a problem with the hardware, come to me. If you have a problem with the operating system or the cluster, go to
Go to
Microsoft,
Microsoft. Yeah.
right? So in case of an integrated system, the OEM is obligated to support the entire solution as such. Think about from a customer support experience perspective, right? It's so magical. I mean, any customer would just appreciate the fact that it's supported as a complete cluster.
Absolutely. So again, Azure Stack HCI, like previously, is a operating system, but so is Windows Server, right? So then,
Yeah,
why?
it's not just an operating system. So it is an operating system which is delivered as an Azure service, right? So that is
Absolutely.
where really the differentiator of Azure Stack HCI is compared to probably, let's say, Windows Server. Because if you really look at Windows Server and Azure Stack HCI, technically there is no difference, right? So it's still built on the very popular Windows Server software-defined technology, right? It's been same thing has been forwarded into Azure Stack HCI, just that it's a stripped down version of the Windows Server, but it's delivered as an Azure service, right? So you have a lot of integration. In fact, very tight integration with that.
Yeah. So when you say it is a stripped down version of Windows Server, does that in any way mean that it is inferior to Windows Server?
Not at
Because
all. Not
yeah,
at all. So think about from a customer standpoint, right? Now, if I am a customer who wants to modernize my uh, virtualized infrastructure from a 3-tier SAN into a hyper-converged infrastructure, right? So I would look at just the virtualization needs, right? I wouldn't be really bothered about some of the other roles that Windows offers today, maybe DHCP services, print services, Active Directory, because those are some endpoints which are already exist today in a customer, typically, right?
right.
Any enterprises that I talk to, they already have a seasoned, installations of AD, DNS, print services, all other roles that you can possibly think of, right? They already exist today. But what do you do for customers who are just want to kind of reap the benefits of HCI for their virtualization needs only, right? So you provide customers with a lighter version of the operating system which can just do that, right? So not only does it do in terms of the lighter version of the operating system, which can do just software defined data center kind of requirement, which is for the virtualization needs, it also reduces the surface attacks significantly. Because if you see Azure Stack HCI, it's a core operating system. There is
Right.
no UI, right? So you are reducing the overall attack from a security standpoint, which is paramount importance in the case of virtualization.
Absolutely. But you know what? You kind of scared me when you said that it is a core operating system. It does not have a GUI, because, and I'm sure a lot of people are also kind of sympathizing with me here, because it is a general perception that if the GUI, of course, I mean, it is a fact that GUI is easier to handle, but then there's also kind of apprehension or kind of hesitation to work with core, the command line, the core operating system versions. So how do you manage Azure Stack HCI? Because me being a typical Azure, not Azure admin, typical Windows admin, I'm very familiar with the clicking I do around. I know where to find what. I know how to navigate the file systems and all. But how does that convert to Azure Stack HCI?
Yes,
Because
so do I. I am a GUI guy as well, right? I like my GUI. Like
yeah,
it to be as seamless as possible. As much as I like command lines to a certain extent, but there could be nerdies out there who are purely, hey, you know what? I hate GUIs, right? I know a lot of people who hate GUIs, so they really want to kind of operate out of PowerShell. The good news with Azure Stack HCI is you don't really on a day-to-day basis have to log into your database, right? So you can manage all of your cluster. If you're a GUI guy, you have Windows Admin Center as a de facto tool to manage and monitor all of your clusters, not just your cluster, including your nodes which are part of the cluster, right? Or if you're a nerdy guy, you have PowerShell commands for you to kind of play around with, right? So in fact, PowerShell is way more powerful, right?
it is.
So you have the best of both worlds. It's just not that. So, but the thing that I pointed out saying is you on a day-to-day basis, you really don't have to log into your Azure Stack HCI OS because remember, it is just a hypervisor, right? So what sits on top of the hypervisor layer, which is basically the software defined components, that is of value to customers today because most of which is automated thanks to software defined technology, right? More, like you rightly pointed out, customers in a 3-tier SAN architecture had to invest a lot of time, not just to learn the different stacks and the tiers that are part of the SAN architecture, but also hire different skill sets to manage the entire cluster. Right? So with the software-defined technology, you pretty much you can manage all of this using the software. So Windows Admin Center. It's great for people out there who love their GUI.
Absolutely. And Windows Admin Center actually, if you haven't been logged in a long time, it has come a long way since the time it was released.
It has.
So if you just log into the Windows Admin Center console for managing your Azure Stack HCI cluster, first of all, like we said, there is a lot of hybrid options available now because with Azure Arc and stuff, again, we'll talk about Azure Stack, Azure Arc in a minute. But as you log in the Azure, Windows Admin Center console itself, there's almost everything you can do from Windows Admin Center itself. So you can take remote connections, you can run remote scripts, you can access hybrid Azure services, you can watch certificates, you can pretty much do everything, I think, right?
Yeah.
So has come a long way since it was released.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely, it is. Compared to how it was initially, it's come a long way. The only advice that I give people who are just trying to explore Azure Stack and CI using managing Azure Stack and CI using particularly known as WAC, make sure you install the latest and the greatest version of the Windows Admin Center. And second most important thing is make sure you update all the extensions, the installed extensions, out there, because there have been a lot of bug fixes that have been going. So this product, like I said, Microsoft is very serious and committed for Azure Stack HCI. So they're bringing in a lot of innovation, a lot of engineering efforts, a lot of bug fixes that you can possibly think of into both Windows Admin Center as well as Azure Stack HCI.
Right. So let's talk about those hybrid services a little bit now, right? So as I mentioned, Azure Arc is is probably at the backbone of the whole Microsoft hybrid cloud solutions today because just like transform the way that you see hybrid cloud, how you manage your infrastructure regardless of the platform that you're sitting on. So in the beginning, before Azure Arc days, let's say it was just private cloud and then it was public cloud. You had a public Azure interface, then you had a Windows Admin Center on-prem or remote RDP sessions or whatever. But then Windows Admin Center came, then Azure Arc came, and now they are kind of tightly integrated with each other. So, what are the services? Because we keep saying that Azure Arc, sorry, not Azure Arc, Azure Stack HCI is built in for cloud. It is a hybrid operating system. It is managed by Azure. But how is it managed by Azure? What do I get? What do I get for virtualizing using Azure Stack HCI as opposed to what do I get by virtualizing with Windows Admin, not Windows Server?
Okay, so let's get into what is Azure Arc, right? So Azure Arc, you can think about it as some kind of a glue that binds your Azure resources with your on-premises resources, right? One of the biggest challenges that you see today is every customer is hopping onto a multi-cloud, right? And when I say multi-cloud, it's not just about public cloud, right? It's about private clouds as well, right? It's about edge locations as well, right? So you have distributed IT ecosystem, which kind of adds a totally new equation into the entire IT landscape in general for customers, right? There are questions about why customers are doing this, right? Because it's not just about customers love putting themselves into a complex situation. It's not that, right? It's end of the day, it's the value that they're looking at. What is the value that I reap out of? For example, why do I need edge computing? Because the data is enormous amount of data is getting generated on the edge. So I need to process that data in the edge and then and there. I don't have time for it to pump it back to the centralized location, process it, and then send it back. So that is one. And why different clouds, hyperscalers, why customers choose GCP, AWS, Azure, and all of that mix. It is because they're not just looking at, value added services. Remember, they're also kind of looking at I don't want to be locked into a particular, right? That's
Right.
one of the things. Cost optimization is the other, right? And services which they get. For example, there may be some services which other public cloud vendor may offer today, which is not available in a particular public cloud vendor. Right? So it's all about building that use case which really solves their problem, irrespective of where they want to operate. Now, if you consider from a customer's angle, when you have distributed IT ecosystem, it really puts customers into a too much of an issue, especially when it comes to management. So this is where Azure Arc really shines. So I'm not sure if people have watched one of my videos about where I've actually onboarded a GCP Ubuntu virtual machine into Azure Arc and shown people how you can actually seamlessly do lifecycle management on that virtual machine, just like you would do on a VM that's actually hosted on public Azure. Right? So it's like that. So it basically Arc gives you the single pane of glass where you can manage, monitor, do lifecycle management of your distributed IT assets, irrespective of where they sit.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, but then again, my question kind of remains the same. So, what other services, what other hybrid services am I getting out of Azure if
Right.
I go with Azure Stack HCI?
Right. So there are a couple of things, right? So one is you're going to get those infrastructure as a services which I just talked about, where you can surface any workload that lives outside of Azure. You can surface that into Azure and manage and monitor those resources just like you would any Azure resource, right? The other thing that's propagating those services into Azure. And the other services where application services, where you can actually bring some of the Azure services into your on-premise infrastructure. Okay, so think about application services could be a data service, for example, SQL managed instance. In fact, every customer that I talk to today is fascinated to learn about SQL MI because SQL MI is just any other SQL MI, which is an evergreen SQL that they normally associate in Azure. They don't have to manage the underlying operating system which hosts the SQL database. It's completely elastic in nature, right? It's easier to scale up or scale down, and you don't need licensing model because it's an evergreen SQL. So they want the same goodness of SQL MI on premise as well. What they do is make use of some of the data services that are available through Azure Arc, which is SQL MI. And right now, it's actually generally available as on July July 30th, 2021. And Postgres, SQL is also under public preview right now. So, you can deploy these services onto your on-premise infrastructure. Now, what it's going to do, one, it is going to save a significant amount of latency issues that customers normally associate with running databases in a
On
public
cloud.
cloud,
Yeah.
right? So, two, it's a very simplistic approach, like I said, in terms of licensing and everything, because it's an evergreen SQL, right? You just pay as you go, simple, right? And the performance, right? So it's going to be especially when I see customers looking at SQL workload, they're always very they always talk about performance. So you get the best performance of SQL Server running on premises. You meet your regulatory and data sovereignty needs if you have, and plus you have a high performance SQL Server.
Absolutely. I was just the other day, I was watching a video by Cosmos Darwin, who is the program manager for Azure Stack. Is it Azure Stack or Azure Stack HCI?
Yeah, it is. It is Azure Stack family. I think it's more now on Azure Stack HCI.
Yeah, so I was just watching his video, and he was just demonstrating how I think it's in a six node cluster, six or eight, I think it was six node cluster, they are able to pull out as much as like 13 million IOPS or something, 12, 13
Yeah, it
million.
is. It's a 12 node, so it's a joint engineering between joint performance testing that was conducted on Intel Optane persistent memory with the NVDIMMs, which are popularly known as. and there are 12 nodes, which actually they did some performance testing. They were able to pull off some 13 million IOPS. It was significant. I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen, Dell has validated the AX7525 on just a 4 node of AMD, EPIC processor on AX7525. They were able to test it and get about 5.8 million IOPS
In a 4 node cluster.
in just a 4 node cluster.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it is indeed. So this is something that customers would love, especially when they're trying to run SQL workload.
Absolutely. And as you go from Azure Arc, it's not only about projecting your non-Azure resources into Azure. You can also make use of the Azure model. You can Azure make use of Azure services. So you can not only do IaaS or PaaS interconnection or interuse. You can also do like Azure Monitor. You can do update management. You have Azure security. You have Azure policies enforcement, right? So regardless of where your resources stay, using Azure Arc just to project that resource into Azure, you can actually manage that Azure, that non-Azure resource as if it was Azure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we spoke about some of the application services. I think I probably skipped the app services portion of Azure Arc, where you can actually propagate that back into your on-premises infrastructure, which is app services, for instance, right? Azure Functions, right? Azure Logic Apps. So in fact, there are a lot of other PaaS
We
services.
haven't even talked about AKS yet.
Yep. I mean, so AKS, remember, it's kind of it's a landing zone for all of these services to sit on top of. Because when you think about PaaS services, most of the PaaS services are containerized. For example, SQL MI is a containerized data services control plane there. So with AKS sitting on top of it, so it makes the elasticity of SQL MI that you normally associate with so much easier to manage on an AKS cluster.
Yeah, absolutely.
AKS is really the foundation to actually deliver these application services on top of.
Right. So, how do you license Azure Stack HCI? Because again, it is an operating system. Do you have an enterprise agreement like you have for a Windows server, or how do you go ahead licensing Azure Stack?
Okay, that's a good question. So Azure Stack HCI today is licensed. Like I said, it is delivered as an Azure service, right? So when you say it is an Azure service, it's an operating system which is delivered as an Azure service. So also think about it like a typical cloud operating model that you associate with Azure, right? So that
Right.
means you are going to be billed monthly against your consumption. How much are you going to be billed? Basically, Microsoft today charges $10 per core. That's a physical core per month. Okay. So, for instance, let's say you have a 4 node cluster with a 24 core 6248R, for instance, and you get about 48 cores and multiply that by number of nodes, which is 4. So you get 192 total physical cores. That means end of the month, Microsoft will generate a bill for $1,920 US, right? So that's how you get billed. Remember, so you don't pay any initial, licensing cost for the Azure Stack HCI OS, okay? Because it is billed as pay as you go against the total consumption of your physical goods, right? But there are the other part of the licensing, which is what about your guest OSs? How do I run my guest operating system, right? The good news is customers today can bring their BYOL licenses, bring your own license, and spin up their workloads on Azure Stack HCI as a guest VM, right? For example, a lot of customers today have enterprise agreement or volume-based licensing, so they can seamlessly use those licenses or volume-based keys that they have for these operating systems and spin up those Windows virtual machines. What about Linux virtual machine? Same thing. So if customers already have those licenses available, they can lift and shift those workloads onto Azure Stack HCI and seamlessly.
Right. Absolutely.
And I didn't even mention about the subscription-based licensing that's available, right? So you can also, for instance, if you don't have any of these enterprise agreement or volume-based licensing, you can still spin up the Windows virtual machine on a subscription-based model, right? So you can just go purchase Windows Server right within the Windows Admin Center. You can go purchase Windows Server of your choice, and you can spin up the workload. So it will be built against your Azure system.
Amazing. Well, there's a lot more to talk about, Zain.
Oh yeah, yeah, I can keep talking all day.
Same, same. It is a vast topic, but again, we have a time constraint, unfortunately. But maybe we'll come back again. Having said that, Jayanth actually runs a hybrid dedicated, I would say. Would you agree if I say that? There's a hybrid dedicated YouTube channel of his own. It's a Jayanth on Cloud.
Yes, yes, it is.
So if you want any more information about Azure Stack in general or Microsoft Hybrid solutions, then head over to Jen. I will link it in the description. But he has amazing videos and hands-on labs as to how to technically connect to Azure Stack HCI, how to connect to different hybrid services, how the difference, the more detailed version of the validated versus integrated Windows Server versus Azure Stack. So all these discussions that we've had, he actually has more detailed information on his videos. So if you're more interested into finding out more, then please go ahead, check out his channel. But for now, Jen, unfortunately we have to stop here, and
Thanks
I
for having me on the show, Samir. Really
it is
appreciate
a
it. Enjoyed
pleasure.
talking to you as always.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a nice day then.
All right.
Cheers. Bye bye.